Today, I'll be teaching you guys how to code in JavaScript for beginners. As you can see, I have opened up Visual Studio Code, which is a very handy coding application. And I've opened up a folder called Code Tutorial. If you don't know what VS Code is, you can search up Visual Studio Code and then download it, which is what I have right here. And I also have a folder that I've created, which is the same folder that's open here. So once you do that, once you get Visual Studio Code or any coding application, make a new file and make it an HTML file, which means having a .html at the end. If you're in Visual Studio Code, like me, if you type an exclamation mark and then press tab, then you'll get the full HTML structure of the page, default. And now I'm just going to type in H1, which is just a header, and hello world. Now I also have an extension installed. It's called Live Server, which auto refreshes the file that's open in my browser that I'm working with in Visual Studio Code. So I recommend you get that. So now if I click Go Live, you see hello world has popped up. And if I press back, then it should auto-update and get rid of it without me refreshing. So now I'm going to make a new file and label it script.js. The name doesn't really matter as long as you add .js at the end. Once you do that, go back to the HTML page and go down a little bit, type script, and if you're in Visual Studio Code, you should already get an autofill option. Instead of clicking the first one, click the second one, the script : source, and this should autofill a tag for you. Now in the source tag, in the source quotes, type script.js or whatever the name of your .javascript file is. So I named it script.js. So now I could theoretically just do all my JavaScript in here, but I made a new file for that because that's the more cleaner option. So the first thing I'm going to be teaching you guys about is variables. Variables are a way to store information. You type out a variable, and the syntax for it is var or var. Then you type out the name of your variable. Now I'm going to name this first name. And it's going to equal my name, my first name. Now these quotation marks, this is just double apostrophe. You could also have quotes like this. And quotes, what they do is anything inside them, it can be written as any text. It doesn't matter what it is. So I'm going to do Neil and single quotes. It doesn't really matter if you do single or double quotes. It's my first name. So I recommend instead of using var for beginners and for anyone, but the more modern version of var is let. So once you do that, you can declare multiple variables. And if you use let, I could later make first name equal something else. I can make it equal something else, like that. So now, another feature is the console. Now the JavaScript, if you go to a web browser and click inspect element, you'll get greeted with the elements page. Then go to the console, and this is where all JavaScript is. So once you do that, keep the console open, and then go back to your JavaScript file, type console.log, parentheses, and type out the name of the variable that you created. So you should see that the console logs Neil. So this is the console, and it logged my first name because I have declared it in this variable. I let first name equal Neil, and then I logged it in the console. I logged the value of this in the console. Now I could have multiple variables. I could have let last name equal and then I could console.log it again. Or instead, I could type a comma, space, and then the name of the second variable. If I go back, I should get my full name right here. And this is script.js7. It's telling me where this is coming from. So script.js, which is this file, and then 7 means the 7th line. So it's coming from this, as you can see. So variables are basically just a way to store information, and they can be very useful. And the information, it can be a string, it can be a number, it could be like 5 or like anything, or it could be something else, like a function. I'll teach you that later in the video. So next up on what I'm going to teach you is arrays. Arrays are a way to store multiple values within a single array, I guess. Single array. Now, the way you declare an array is you type out the same way as var. So, or let a variable, let array equal, and instead of just having like something like this and then doing that, you have a bracket, semicolon at the end. And then inside you can type any value. You could have numbers, you can have strings, and you can have other variables. You could, like, if you had another variable up here, then I could put that in the value of there. So the way you separate values is say 1, comma, space, 2. And arrays, they don't count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's how coding works. They start from 0 instead of 1. So this would be the first element, but it would be labeled as 0. This is the second element, but it'd be 1, and so on. So I can and if you want to use an array, if you want to say use a specific value in an array, you can use, I'm going to console.log it so you can see it. So console.log an array, and if I just console.log the array, then I'll get all the values in here. So if I go back, you should see that there's 6, this 6 means there's 6 values in this array, and then it starts 0, 1, 2, these are the values in there. So if I click this little arrow, it's a neat little thing. So say if I change this to like A, B, or wait, actually I need to use strings for that. A, B, C, D, E, and F. So now you see that this is counting from 0. So 0 is A, 1 is B, 2 is C, and so on. So an array is a useful way, and you can store multiple infinite values in an array. You can have as many as you want. And if you want to just say, if I wanted to like use, say I wanted to just only use C, not anything else, then what I would do is instead of just having array, I have array and then brackets, and then I type the value of the one I want. So this would be 0, then 1, and then 2. So array, and then the 2 value, the index of 2. This is what's called an index. 0, the index of 0, index 1, and so on. So the index of 2. So I should just get C in the console, because it counts 0, 1, and then 2. So next thing I'm going to move on to is objects. Objects are basically just a way to store multiple values inside of something. So I'm going to type that out. Objects are a way to store multiple values inside of something. So the syntax for that would be same as variable, I'm gonna call this one person, then equals, and then instead of using brackets, you use curly braces. And then you can type out any property that you would like. So I'm going to have my property start first name, colon, let's see, Neil, or string, Neil, last name, equal, what do you call it? There, Patel. And then you can have infinitely many values as you want. That's not what I want. You can have infinite values as you want, but they all have to be separated by a comma. And then each of the values must have a colon, and then space, and they can have anything after it. So, like, I could set my age value to something. So I'd have to comma, age, colon, and then the number, whatever it was. So now if I console.log this, console.log person, and you see I get first name, colon, Neil, last name, colon, Patel. If I press the arrow, you see the exact syntax of this. First name, Neil, and then Patel. So I could, if I wanted to console.log a specific one, then I could do person.firstname. And then I would get Neil as in the console, because I'm only logging Neil, the first name. Now if I could have multiple values in here, but I only have 2 right now. You can have infinitely many values, just like an array. These are very useful once you get better at coding. The next thing I'm going to hop into is called functions. Functions are a way to store an action or piece, which is basically the same thing, piece of code, and use it whenever you need it. So the syntax for a function, you can actually have 2 different syntaxes for this. The main one that you're probably going to use more often is just simply function, the name function, or the word function. Then I'm going to call this my function, and then parentheses, and then you don't really have to have a space. I'm just going to put a space, and then curly braces, and then there, that's your function syntax. So these parentheses are if you want to call a function, which I'm going to show you in a bit. You can pass in values whenever you call it in, and then it takes those values, and then the curly braces is where the code lies. So I gotta have a function console.log first name, or not for like console.log Neil, and then console.log Patel. So I could have a function that does that, my function. So if I want to call it, then I simply type out the name of my function, which is just my function, then parentheses, and this is what I was talking about when you call the function. Say, I could have first name right here. I'm going to have first name as a value here, comma, and then last name. Oops, forgot a letter. And then instead of having strings, I could type first name here, and then last name. So now, if I pass in Neil, and then Patel, Patel. So if I pass this in, then what this is going to do is it's going to call my function, and then for this first value, it's going to pass in Neil as that, and then right here, it's going to take Neil as a value, and then console.log that. And the same goes for last name. So if I open the console, I should see Neil Patel in 2 different lines, because this is being logged in 2 different lines. So you see Neil Patel, script.js 5 and 6, and that's 5 and 6. So functions are by far one of the most useful things in JavaScript. Another version of you could have a function, you could store it in a variable. So I could say let example function equal function. Parentheses, curly braces. So then I could just have this, and then that's basically, I could have the same code in here, and I could pass in that. But that's not going to come up as often, but you should probably just use this, because that's the more common one. Oops. So if I wanted, I could have multiple things in here. So I could have an if statement. So basically, functions, you can just use them, and you can call them. So this, I could pass in another name. I could say, John, and then right here I could type Smith. And then this would just change the values. Because this is my input value, which is the parentheses. The function does not know what the input value is going to be. Only I know. And then I could have a function like that. So those are the 4 things that I have, that I taught you today. The first thing is variables. The second is arrays. Third is objects. And fourth is functions. Variables store data that can be used later. Arrays store data in a value. Arrays store multiple things in a value, and they can take any value. Objects store properties of values. Then functions, they store actions that can be used. And this is how to learn JavaScript for beginners 2023.